Hello, and welcome to David and Ashley Explain Stuff. Today we will look at the economy of our second favorite country, Spain. Spain is the home of 48 million people, the running of the bulls, the television show El Internado, and a 21% unemployment rate. Yes, a 21% unemployment rate. To put that in perspective, the US currently sits at about a 4.9% unemployment rate. What happened in Spain that caused this disastrous unemployment rate, and what can be done to fix it?
As of very recently, Spain has been on the mend. The Spanish government has been making enterprise much easier, leading to more entrepreneurship and consumer spending and risk taking. Its exports are rising, and its economy is expected to be growing at 3%, double the average rate of all the other Eurozone countries. The country's economy is also heavily tied into its political situation as well, varying greatly with different elected leaders coming into power. While it is still home to the second highest unemployment rate in the Eurozone, don't worry, Greece, you're still in the lead. That is rapidly decreasing as well. Lower fuel prices have been acting as a sort of tax cut, stimulating the economy and decreasing the still alarmingly high unemployment rate, the highest in the developed world.
Even though Spain's unemployment rate is the lowest it has been since 2011, a 21% unemployment rate is still a problem. For people under 25, the unemployment rate is more than double that, at 47.7%. One of the reasons for Spain's declining unemployment rate is that people, especially young people, are giving up and leaving Spain to find jobs elsewhere. Young workers are turning to Germany, England, and even China in search of jobs. Fernando de Zavala Carvajal left Spain to found Into China, a firm that matches people, many of whom are also Spanish, to jobs and internships in China. He said that the best decision he made was leaving Spain.
What happened to make Spain's unemployment so astronomically high wasn't one thing in particular, but a key mixture of elements that combined and brought the economy down with them. The first was the enormous housing bubble, and when that burst, it not only left borrowers in shambles, but also tore an enormous hole in Spain's GDP, ripping away construction jobs, which were a large source of unskilled labor opportunity in Spain. Another huge detriment are the labor laws in Spain that make it incredibly hard to fire workers. Though this may seem to help full-time workers, it actually encourages companies to hire more temporary workers to get around the process of hiring and firing a full-time worker. The final aspect, though harder to grasp, is the lack of growth that comes with being a part of the Eurozone during turbulent times in the Euro's value, and how that punishes a country's borrowing power. At first glance, joining the Eurozone was a good deal for Spain. Before the housing bubble popped, Spain was experiencing large economic growth, and its debt-to-GDP ratio was shrinking rapidly. After the housing bubble collapsed, though, Spain was met with unemployment, property prices declining by a third of their value, and recession, making their relatively low amount of debt flare up and threatened to name Spain the fourth in line for a Eurozone bailout. To make matters worse, during time of economic flourish, banks not only borrowed heavily, but borrowed heavily from international banks instead of national savers. This has made it much harder for banks to repay all of the lost euro value. Spain has asked for 100 billion euros to set up recovery mechanisms internationally. Not as a bailout, as government leader Mariano Rajoy insists.
How should Spain fix its huge unemployment problem? Lowering interest rates seems like a good idea. After all, lowering interest rates encourages people and firms to take out loans, which encourages spending, which shifts that lovely aggregate demand curve to the right. Firms hire more people to meet the increased demand, and unemployment goes down. Unfortunately, Spain doesn't actually have control over its own monetary policy. As a member of the European Union, Spain uses the euro, so its monetary policy is controlled by the European Central Bank. Even if Spain asked nicely for lower interest rates in Europe are already dangerously low. Euribor, the interest rate used across the Eurozone, is actually negative, which puts European banks in the uncomfortable position of having to pay people who borrow from them. Monetary policy is not the solution to Spain's unemployment. Most of Spain's unemployment is structural unemployment, created when the housing industry disappeared. So just helping Spain's economy won't necessarily get those people jobs. The people who once worked in real estate need training so they can find other jobs, but companies have little incentive to train them. You see, there are two types of labor contracts in Spain: permanent and temporary. Permanent contracts are rigid and offer generous layoff benefits. A permanent worker who is laid off in Spain gets 33 days of pay for every year that they worked. Temporary contracts, however, only last for 2 years, after which the employee is either fired or hired permanently. Temporary workers receive less pay and fewer layoff benefits, so companies are encouraged to hire more temporary workers. In 2015, 92% of labor contracts signed in Spain were temporary. Companies don't want to train temporary workers. After all, they're only temporary. But since Spain needs to train its workers if it wants to lower its unemployment, you can see why the whole temporary contract system is a problem. If Spain wants to lower its unemployment, the government needs to get rid of the two-contract system and replace it with a single labor contract, one with more protection than the temporary contract, but fewer layoff benefits than the permanent one. While a new contract would slow the hiring of new workers in the short run, in the long run, it would give companies the incentive to train their workers.
Those steps have already been taken by government leader Mariano Rajoy to make firing workers less expensive and dividing temporary and permanent workers. Radical changes to the economy will by no means happen overnight. With an unemployment rate of still well over 20% and a foot in the Eurozone, there is no guarantee whatsoever of Spain's fast-tracked recovery. By aiding the temporary worker situation, the unemployment will fall, but slowness should be expected, and even small improvement on Spain's economy should be praised.